Light Pollution News, August 2026, Fundamental Rhythms. Howdy, friends. It's a new Light Pollution News. I'm very lucky to be joined by an excellent slate of guests. With me today are Shane Ludtke of the Actual Astronomy Podcast, wildlife ecologist Dr. Kaori Yokochi, and CEO of Dark Sky International, Ruskin Hartley. This episode, what happened when voters of Los Angeles were asked to fork a streetlight improvement program? How does one dark sky reserve protect its dark skies? And there is a contest to be a chief star counter. Do you have what it takes? All this coming up next, and stay with us after the show's closeout for some additional health and news related items that I just wasn't able to cover during the course of the main recording. Let's get into it. Welcome to Light Pollution News, where we talk about all things artificial light and how it affects our environment. For you at home who may be new to Light Pollution News, be sure to check out today's show notes or visit our website. I'm glad to announce that we do now accept voicemails. We've always accepted show texts, but now we take voicemails too. So simply click on the send voicemail link in today's show notes. I'm always thrilled to record this show because I get to talk to interesting people. And this episode, I'm very lucky to have with us someone who's probably pretty well known to almost everyone on this call, probably everyone who's listening, someone who is extremely interesting in his own right. And that's Ruskin Hartley, CEO of Dark Sky International. Ruskin, you have over 20 years of conservation experience. You engage leaders and communities on how to best preserve and protect nighttime environments. Ruskin also was able to take you away from your beloved English soccer or football, sorry. And unfortunately, it looks like, you know, they're not playing for the final, but they are beating the pants off of the French. So that's got to be a good thing. Ruskin, welcome to the show.
Yeah, great to be on. I appreciate you having me.
You have a long experience in conservation. We live in a moment where you're seeing a lot of conservation rollbacks occurring. And I'm curious, you said yes to this job, this Dark Sky International. For many, I think, in a conservation field, it's probably seen as a tertiary cause or a tertiary thing to chase after versus, you know, previously you worked with looking at protecting physical environments like ecologies in forests and whatnot and water ecologies. What made you take this job?
That's a great question. I get asked that question a lot, right? So as you said, I've worked in conservation probably for 25 years now. I've worked on protecting and restoring old-growth redwood forests. I've worked on removing plastics from the ocean and cleaning up water quality down in Los Angeles. And I'll be honest, I had not even heard of the term light pollution until I saw a job posting from the International Dark Sky Association, now Dark Sky International, about 8 years ago, looking for a new executive director. And I was curious because who doesn't like space? Because that's where my head immediately went to. But the more I learned about the organization, the more I learned about what it was doing, it became clear to me that they were actually tackling what was one of the overlooked conservation issues that our planet is facing. And what really attracted me to it is there are actually simple things that everyone can do to make a difference. They can make a meaningful difference and you can see them immediately. And that part of my goal is to make sure the community more broadly starts to recognize natural darkness in the same way that we recognize clean air and clean water as things of value that need protecting.
When we talk about light pollution, people recognize light pollution. It's a name, it's a phrasing that I hear from a lot of people in urban environments. It's not a foreign term. It's a very common term. People understand what drives it. And yet there's really no impetus, even from green organizations, say like here we have the Schuylkill Banks, and they do green trail infrastructure for, say, bikers and stuff. There's no impetus to care about it. What's the disconnect?
It's a great question, and I wish I had a very clear, succinct answer to it, apart from to say I think there's something very fundamental about our relationship as humans to light and dark. It literally, every great book starts with a moment where light is created from darkness. So at some point it is very embedded in who we are, those relationships. And at the same time, natural darkness, the day-night cycle, bright days, dim evenings, dark nights, is the most fundamental rhythm of our planet. Our planet has been through many fundamental changes. We have an atmosphere, we have water, we have oceans, we have mountains that have come and gone. But one of the great constants is the Earth has been turning. It's been spinning on its axis, and we've had bright days, dim evenings, and dark nights. So every living thing has evolved with that signal. as part of our DNA. It's very, very deep, and we just can't escape it. We cannot escape it, whether we're a nocturnal animal that's awake during the night and asleep during the day, or a diurnal animal like us that's asleep during the night and awake during the day. It's just something very fundamental on a biological basis about what it means to be human.
We'll be talking a little more about some of that stuff in both these episodes this month. One of the things that I think is optimistic about, conservation is all about optimism and projecting the future you want to have. It's very challenging right now both in Canada and parts of Canada, like places like Ontario, here in the US at the federal level. You see conservation really under serious attack. How do you keep your head up when you have these difficult moments in policy?
Well, I'd be lying if I didn't say it was a challenging. Literally everything I've worked to protect for the last 30 years is under threat. I was reading today, like just earlier this morning, I was reading the Endangered Species Act is being changed. So you can basically kill threatened species if you want to, right? No issue there, because they might stand in the way of industrial development. Here in southern Arizona, we're dealing with a continental scale crisis where we're walling off the continent with a 30-foot high double wall at the moment. And as you alluded to, up in northern Canada, actually down here in Arizona and California, we're facing the very real effects of climate change with these incredible wildflowers that are fueling both change and got some of the worst air quality in the world in the eastern United States as we're recording this. So where do I get hope and optimism? I get hope and optimism when I get to go outside and look up, and you can still see the stars. I still know they're there, and I still know that if we move together and work together, there is the opportunity to bring them back and restore them. And that is just an indication of our ability to do something positive and hopeful for the planet. And as we'll talk, there are people on every continent in most countries around the world who are very passionate about it. They're doing everything they can.
Yeah, we all love the stars, which is an interesting dichotomy of how we act, right? Let's move on. I have two other guests here besides Ruskin, obviously. So next up is Dr. Kaori Yokochi, who is a wildlife ecologist at Deakin University down in Melbourne. Dr. Yokochi, you study Australian mammals, specifically focusing on urban ecology and human impact on wildlife. You're a member of the Network for Ecological Research and Artificial Light, and also a member of the Australian Dark Sky Alliance. Dr. Yokochi, I'm very glad to have you with us this morning in your time. It's nighttime, my time, but welcome to Light Pollution News. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Bill. It's really exciting to be here.
I read somewhere that I know you've done a tremendous amount of work in ecology, and one of the things you look at is, the typical things like how rat poison affects owls and how humans inadvertently may affect creatures within the habitat that humans build, right? Like the cities and communities that humans build. But one of these items that you designed a rope bridge for the western ringtail possum. Tell me about this. What is this?
Yeah. So first of all, I think I have to explain what possums in Australia, because they are quite different from opossums that you probably get, in Americas. They're both marsupials, but, they're actually quite separate or distinctly different within the marsupial clade. And so possums that we have in Australia, they're mostly arboreal, so live in trees. And then we have this western ringtail possums that only live in this southwest corner of Western Australia. It's not small from standard, but in Australian standard, it's a very small pocket. So they are critically endangered species. So they were kind of on the brink of extinction. And so for my PhD, what I looked at was the impacts of roads on these western ringtail possums, because we knew they were getting killed on the road. And one thing I did, on top of monitoring their movements, seeing if the roads are actually acting as a barrier, which they were. One thing we did was to build this bridge for possums across the road. This is called rope bridge. So it's literally just two poles, there's electric poles, and then you can imagine kind of ladder between, and that's 8 meters high off the road. And the idea is there's a rope coming off from this pole into the habitat surrounding, the road as well, so that possums don't have to come on the ground to cross the road. And the idea of these wildlife crossing structures are that, possums or any animals, they get to cross the road without getting hit by cars, but also that helps them kind of reconnect, the populations reconnect so that the gene flow is maintained. So we did that. And in other parts of Australia, other types of possums, it took them like 17 months to start crossing. So we weren't really, we weren't really waiting at the edge of their seat. But then from the first night, even before we put the ladder bit, because we erected the poles first, they were already investigating the poles. And then as soon as we put the ladder in, they started crossing or, investigating in the first night. So that was a massive surprise for us. And just showed how keen, I guess, or how in a way, I guess they should be a bit more cautious. And that's one of the reasons why they're a bit critically endangered, because they just went on this, brand new structure and started using it. So maybe, I don't know if it was the greatest thing, but still for us, it was a great news. And then they keep using it, to this stage. And since then, there've been, I think, around over 30 bridges being built in their, distribution where they occur, so that, trying to help them cross the road without getting hit by cars and so on. So
that's such a cool story. Are other animals using it?
This rope bridge around there, it's mostly western ring-tailed possums. Maybe sometimes I've seen some birds, just perching on it and resting on it. But around the area, this is just that western ring-tailed possums. But in Eastern Coast, where I am now, there are some rope bridges as well, and these are being used by multiple species.
I can just picture like a raccoon trying to use this.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That's really neat. So out of curiosity, how did you guys track it? Where do you have cameras set up so you could watch these bridges? And
Yeah. For my research, we had the camera on, one camera at both ends. And what we did was, because it's got timestamp as well. So whenever the possum was crossing one end, coming into the view of one camera, and then that would be entering the bridge. And then if we see if we get a photo of possum on the other end, like 2 minutes later, and then we will log it as a complete crossing. So we will actually kind of logging if they're just, getting on and coming back and not crossing, or are they actually crossing the road.
Very clever. Congratulations to you and your team. That's really neat. I saw that and I was like, I have to ask this. I saw that out there. I was like, I'm really curious about this.
Yeah. And these bridges are not just in Australia, they're all over the world as well. So there'll be some in the US, Canada, and, everywhere. So these great things for, any arboreal species.
Great. Right. Well, thank you for your contribution. Lastly, I have someone from a show that I love, someone who's been on many times before, and also your co-host, Shane, has recently been on. Shane Ludtke from the Actual Astronomy Podcast. It's a weekly show where you guys geek out on telescopes, eyepieces, mounts, you name it, all sorts of fun things that most normal people probably don't even know exist. Shane, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, good to see you, Bill. Thank you for reaching out. I always enjoy coming on, and I learn a lot from the other guests that you have on, and it's always a fun conversation.
Hey, you guys started this year to do Messier roundups, I guess, for the month is probably the best way to put it, or for like a region of time, like quarter for the month. I know I was listening to it really heavily for a bit, and then it's just life, and it bumped me off a little bit, but I thought that was really neat. I thought that was really cool. And Chris goes into such detail on some of this stuff that, I remember it was like in March when I hadn't seen stars in I don't know how many months, socked in with whatever clouds, melting snow or what have you. And I was just like, man, I need to get back out there. You guys do a great job of sparking that drive, kicking your butt, I guess, to get people out there.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. And honestly, like we kind of, do it for ourselves. We're selfish. And it motivates us to get out and do more observing too. It was, I guess, one of the unintended consequences of the podcast was it serves to motivate Chris and I as well. So it's a lot of fun. And yeah, the Messier episodes, like we've done various episodes on the Messier objects in the past, but we thought we would do a monthly episode on which objects to look at, 12 months out of the year. And if you follow the list, it's an easy way to get through all 110 and you'll be golden by December.
Yeah, and these Messier lists, for you at home who are like, what the heck is Messier? What are we talking about? For hockey fans, it's like Mark Messier, that's the way it's spelled. It's probably the easiest way to put it. But yeah. What is the list? What's special about this list?
Yeah, great question. So Charles Messier is the creator of this list. And Charles Messier was a French astronomer I forget what time period. I want to say maybe the 1700s, but don't quote me on that. And at that time, comet hunting was a lucrative endeavor. Royalty would often, reward comet discovery. And as such, a lot of folks there wasn't a lot of telescopes back then, but those that had a telescope made comet hunting a job, essentially. And so what Charles Messier did is, as he was scanning the sky, he would come across fuzzy objects, and he would record those sometimes as not comets, just to keep track of things that he's seen and to kind of ignore those because that's not what he was interested in. And his instrument, or his telescope at the time, was fairly modest compared to today's standards. So essentially, he ended up plotting a lot of the brightest deep sky objects. Not all of them, like there's never a perfect astronomy list that, probably has all of the great objects, but the Messier list is quite good. There's a lot of showpiece objects there, and most folks new to astronomy or amateur astronomy typically will gravitate towards the Messier objects as the first things that they'll look at for deep sky.
Yeah, and they're very accessible, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Even in light polluted areas is one of those things that you can probably knock out a bunch of Messiers.
Yeah. Like even I live in a city of about 250,000 people, and it's fairly light polluted. But from my backyard, a lot of the brighter globular clusters are visible through a modest telescope, and open clusters are great. The galaxies suffer a little bit, and the nebula suffer, from light pollution. But you could probably get at least half of that list done from your backyard.
All right. Did you guys hear about this? A chief star counter. Kaori, this is down in your neck of the woods, down in the Sunshine Coast Hinterland Dark Sky Reserve. So what does it entail? Oh, well, the volunteer role involves counting stars. Kind of obvious, right, with the name. The catch is that you have to actually stay awake long enough to do so. Applications for the Chief Star Counter ran from June 17th to June 30th, with one lucky person receiving a phone call back on July 1st. The winner would count stars from July 8th through July 10th. The position was largely targeted towards children, but it includes some very nice adult perks, which is like a round-trip flight to the Sunshine Coast, 2-night stay at the Narrows, escape luxury rainforest retreat, say that a few times, guided stargazing, and bestowal of the coveted Chief Star Counter designation for all of your classmates to drool over. The winner this year was 9-year-old Sarah Meldrum from Victoria. So congratulations, Sarah. What a pretty interesting contest. What a cool thing to do. I'm curious what all your thoughts are on this contest here, Chief Star Counter.
I thought that was awesome. What a way to engage, young generation, right? And that's what we need to do in any work of conservation. I think if you hook the children and, they're the next generation, but also you get the people around them hooked and, invested. So yeah, what a fun thing to do.
I think it's really innovative and creative. It is also kind of poignant for me, right? 100 years ago, we didn't need chief star counters because most people could step outside their front porch, and that was their reality for most people back then. And now, the vast majority of people, as I know Bill, live under light polluted skies, and actually most children growing up today will never see a starfield like that. So actually to introduce people to it in this way is genius. I think it's very creative from a marketing perspective. And we're also delighted the Sunshine Coast recently became Australia's second international dark sky reserve, right? So this is a community that this is a fun marketing stunt, right? It's getting publicity, we're talking about it, but there's also a community that is coming together to protect those stars. They're not taking it for granted. They want to make sure that they're there for generations of children to come.
I thought it was pretty cool. On the creative approaches to drumming up awareness of the new designation and the area, I think that's probably one of the best ones I've seen yet. That is, as both of you guys said, a really target group that may never see the skies and have an embedded curiosity when they see those skies. I know I would. And I think most kids, because you grow up loving stars and dinosaurs, and then for some reason we become adults and we forget about both. So
I think it's something that would be interesting. It's probably something they'll carry with them for the rest of their life, right? That early formative memory at that time is profound. Who knows what they're going to be, right?
Right.
With that experience of exploring the cosmos.
We don't know if we're going to see this. We're going to see Sarah again in the future and be in some big big wig astronaut, PhD, you name it, doing something for astrophysics. You don't know. We'll see. Up in the remote high altitude valley of Ladakh, India, sit a dense collection of astronomical observatories. Included in the area are the 2-meter infrared Himalayan Chandra telescope, the 21-meter gamma ray Chernikov scope, the high-altitude gamma ray telescope array that consists of 7 telescopes and a series of smaller telescopes. The area itself has special astronomical significance, drawing comparisons to the Atacama Desert due to its dry climate and its 270 clearer nights a year. The geography of this area, however, makes for an interesting challenges in that the telescopes are located within 20 kilometers, 12 miles from the disputed Chinese-Indian border, and the area was off limits really to tourism until the mid-90s. Even today, visitors may need permits to visit the stars. Also, those very stars that we're talking about today, as in 2022, the area obtained a dark sky reservation designation from you guys, Ruskin, and there was an interesting study out of the Sustainable Earth Reviews journal asking if protecting the night sky is a viable model for sustainable development. The team performed a number of assessments, including interviews with stakeholder groups, biodiversity surveys, and several additional qualitative tools, including accounts of negotiations between scientists and locals prior to becoming a dark sky reserve. Since the creation of the dark sky reserve, tourism has increased, bringing in with the development and increased light to the region. Study found in 2024 of the 28,000 tourists who visited the area, over 1/3 of them took part in astrotourism. Development prior to the designation is thought to have degraded the once pristine night skies to arboreal too. However, still being debated, still under research. They have inconclusive readings on that. The Indian Institute of Astrophysics is still conducting measurements to confirm that. Though it should be noted that despite working to promote responsible lighting practices, night sky erosion hasn't decreased, along with the sky erosion, air quality from vehicle emissions, lack of proper waste, sewage management. There's a whole bunch of developmental issues that are beginning to stress the region. With regards to sky quality, one area that presents difficulty derives from the military presence in the area, which is required and is also lending itself to require more light. So here we have something that I haven't seen really in my time doing this show, which is a true assessment of the benefits and challenges facing astrotourism hotspots. Ruskin, first off, what do you make of that assessment? What do you make of this idea of assessing these challenges?
Yeah, well, first off, just a quick clarification that this was independently determined as a dark sky reserve. They are in discussions with us about getting independent recognition as an international dark sky reserve, but it is really encouraging that the people in India, the government of India, the people in this state recognize this area and it's the value of darkness, both for the astronomy and the science that's going on. And also, it's just, if you look at a global map, India is one of the most light polluted countries in the world, which is not surprising given it's also one of the most populous country in the world. And I think the challenge that they're facing really speaks to the value of the International Dark Sky Places program. There are dark sky places, if you call them out, what we want to avoid is people bringing their bad lighting habits from their daily lives into these places. So really our Dark Sky Places program is about both these are places that are naturally dark. They are places that people have put protections in place through policies and local ordinances, and they're also doing demonstrations of good quality lighting. And it's by bringing those hand in hand that these places then have the confidence that the astrotourism ventures that they're bringing forward today can survive into the future, as opposed to they end up being the very tool that obliterates those naturally dark skies. But we are seeing a growing interest around the world around this astrotourism as a driver of rural economic development. Here in India, you just discussed, actually in South Africa, they have adopted a national astrotourism strategy, and in particular around Southland and the Southern telescopes. They're some of the largest telescopes in the world. They want to make sure they put the protections in place, and astrotourism is something that can benefit the local economy, because candidly, these large telescopes, they don't require many people to operate them. So once they are built, there's very little economic impact on these communities. And so to get these communities to support them, places in South Africa and Chile and otherwise are trying to figure out how can we use astrotourism, people's desire to go and visit naturally dark places, as a way for the communities to derive local benefit and local employment for these ventures.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I didn't think about that part right there. That's kind of like the inverse of the data center. I will note there's a couple of interesting approaches that are going in Ladakh, and that involves training kids to act as astronomy ambassadors to help guide visitors on their journey up there. Also, the use of mini planetariums in areas that are considered off of the main stretch of the beaten path villages that aren't really benefiting from the non-Dark Sky International designated Dark Sky Reserve. I also want to note that in some cases, you simply can't really determine what unnecessary lighting is. And I know we've had conversations on the show previously about this very topic. Over in Uttarakhand, researchers are battling increased light pollution to a number of telescopes, including the 3.6 meter Devashal optical telescope. Scientists are looking to follow Ladakh's example and build protections from the observatories in hopes of becoming some kind of dark sky designation. However, the lighting in the area is often felt that's needed to deter leopard attacks. So there's a practical use, or at least people consider a practical use for some of the lighting. Maybe there's a better way to do it. Maybe there's a more responsible approach to implementing that same lighting, but there seems to be a practical need for it.
Yeah, Dark Sky's approach is not to turn off the lights and plunge the world into medieval darkness. It's to follow our principles for responsible outdoor lighting. And, we know the physics is well known. If you eliminate the uplight and the light that's going up just above the horizon, you eliminate probably 90% of the sky glow. And if you can drop the light levels down to the least required, you can reduce the reflection. And then after you've done that, if you can warm them up and use the warmer colors, that again reduces sky glow. And actually the net result is you just get better quality lighting. Right. Often what we see is people light in the name of safety and security. They slap a wall pack on the side of the building and they blind everybody. And actually, if you shield it and point it down the ground and dim it down a bit, suddenly you can see, right? So there is actually no daylight between better quality lighting and what Dark Sky advocates. And I think for these large observatories, what is also essential is you need to put strict buffer zones in place. You need probably 10, 20 kilometer buffer zones where there essentially is no light. If you're spending millions or billions of dollars building a major observatory, I think that was really the lesson that we learned from what was going on in the Atacama Desert early this year of the European Southern Observatory, a green hydrogen facility, even if it has very good lighting that follows our principles, is introducing light into an area that is otherwise naturally dark, and that's fundamentally incompatible with $1 billion telescope that is so sensitive.
I guess I wish I could have that for my $2,000 telescope. I could have some kind of ruling on that,
but you joke, but you could. I mean, if you had enough money to surround your $2,000 telescope and put it in the middle of a 100,000 acre private ranch or reserve, you could control the light in that area.
That's true.
Unfortunately, most of us aren't in that position. It's like we're cheek by jowl by our neighbors, and so we have to go and talk to our neighbors about, would you mind dimming your lights down and shielding them, right? So yeah, there's neighbor conversation, right?
And also from the leopard's point of view as well, this one I thought was really interesting and really challenging, because that's what we call, like ecologists call, human-wildlife conflict, where, humans have this conflict of wildlife, and, as a result of that, what humans put in place is hurting, the wildlife. But with this one, light probably is one of the easiest, I guess, or perceived as easiest solution to install. And also, it's not necessary. It doesn't look like, too unethical in a way. It's not like actually going there and killing them. But also the issue with this is that like leopards or any other animals, they might react to light being turned on to start with because it's something new, because animals have this neophobia. But then light no longer becomes something new. So it might actually stop working. So I think it's really important to keep working with the community and actually trying to come up with different wide-ranging solutions, not just one thing, and then just try to resolve this human-wildlife conflict from that point of view too.
Kaori, you bring up a really good point, and this is actually something that I've been curious about, and I don't think anyone here can speak to this, but I've been curious about on the crime studies that I see that have come out, especially from the University of Pennsylvania here, mentioning big reductions in crime due to light. I would assume people do similar things where we get used to, as a stimulus, we are affected by the stimulus. And then when the stimulus becomes the norm, we get used to it and we adapt to it. No one here is going to be able to speak to that point, but I'm curious about that. That's one thing that I'll love to see in a study down the road on some of these lighting and crime pieces, is the duration of time, if ever you see changes in activity from the installation and, and stuff picking up.
I was wondering, I also always wonder, if all those floodlight that's constantly on, is that actually effective, or is it more effective to actually have it turn on when humans are, something is moving there? Because then that change from dark to light is going to make people notice more, I guess, which is not, what the criminals don't want people to do.
Yeah.
We get asked a lot of questions about the crime studies, and so far as I'm not familiar with the particular studies that you referenced, Bill, but we are familiar with a wide range of studies here. First, a lot of them have some very poor statistics, and say that off the bat. The statistics is maybe not the strong suit of some of these studies, but there are many studies that show there's no impact, or that the crime goes up, or that the crime goes down. So what it suggests is there's a lot of other compounding factors that are not being considered. From just a pure lighting perspective, I've seen very few of these studies that actually accurately describe what is going on from a lighting perspective. Is it quality lighting? There have been some studies about how we relate to light, how we feel safe, and those tend to suggest that if there's a little bit of light, we do feel safer out at night. But it doesn't mean that more light makes us feel more safe. It tails off pretty quickly, and so the suggestion there, well-designed, low levels of light might potentially have a deterrent. Who knows? There's a lot of other compounding factors, but it doesn't mean you need to go and put a bunch of floodlights in the back of all these alleys in the name of safety. That is, I believe, just I'll just call this, it's a lazy solution when they need to do is go and sit down with the communities and really understand what's going on. When people have done that, crime protection, even environmental design, so they've gone and actually worked with communities to look about how do we design spaces that are welcoming for people. So when there's people out, there tends to be less crime. So it's a very interesting area, and I, to be honest, tear my hair out every time there's one of those studies come out, because they tend to get picked up, and they tend to get promoted with the simplest of all headlines when the reality is much more complex.
Yeah, and you'll see cities like Detroit and Atlanta pick it up as justification for activities that they do. But I think there's an easy way around some of that lighting, Kaori. It's called a mask, and you see it all the time in videos. I live in, one of the biggest cities in the U.S., and, you see stuff happening all the time in these perfectly bright streets. It's not like, people aren't having their cars stolen and broken into and all this fun stuff that lights are supposed to make people, the criminals, blow up in steam when it hits them. So, well, didn't mean to take us down too much of a rabbit hole there, but I did want to, before we depart the topic of dark sky places, South Carey, home to the gold tier South Carey International Dark Sky Reserve, is installing more monitoring stations, and which by and large, it appears to be that everyone's on board. Although you can read some signs of little concern creaking through, and that really comes from restrictions on the community. And Ruskin, this is a pertinent issue, and it's been pertinent this year because we've had many communities put in effect ordinances or have conversations about it, and some debates. I know Summit Daily was a weekly treasure trove of back and forth between people, arguing for and against. I came across this from Palo Alto Online, and I wanted to bring it up while you were on because I wanted to get your honest understanding on this. This is a quote from a opinion piece in Palo Alto Online. It's linked in the show page. If you go to the show page, you can see this here. Can dark skies at night really be beneficial, or is this far-fetched idea designed to fool people with half-truths and exaggerated claims, perhaps with the goal of making this a profitable undertaking for Dark Sky International? So how much money really are you making on these dark sky places, Ruskin?
I wish it was a profitable enterprise. It's actually quite the reverse. Every time one comes in, we have to scramble and figure out how we're going to fund our staffing times to support these, right? So let me just mention a couple things, Bill. I mean, in terms of Dark Sky International, 80+% of our funding for our small team comes from individuals and family foundations. That's where the lion's share of the money comes from. We get a little bit, 3% comes or something like that from some of our corporate sponsors and partners. And I looked at this, we have about 16% we call from our program revenue, where people are paying us for our services. Most of that is actually lighting manufacturers who pay to get their light fixtures certified. Less than 0.5% of our funding, about $14,000 in 2025, came from very, very modest fees that people pay as they start to become generally being international dark sky place. It's currently $250. So no, the reality is every place that wants to become an international dark sky place, I have to figure out how to get more money so that we can support the team to coach and advocate and support these communities as they go through the process.
It's not providing a dividend for you?
Oh, no, the far reverse. Every time one comes to me, again, literally, we have to figure out how we can fund it, right? So, and again, we want it to be accessible for everyone. So, no, it is certainly not a money maker for us. I mean, we're in it for the impact. We're in it here to support cities and communities do the right thing. And I think maybe part of the challenge here is I think when people hear the word dark sky, they assume a certain thing. They probably assume, you have to turn off all the lights off. Actually, early last year, we released some new lighting templates for use by municipalities and cities here in the United States. These are responsible outdoor lighting codes. These are not, we do not refer to them as dark sky lighting codes. These are responsible outdoor lighting codes that mean the nice author of this letter would not have their neighbor blasting a safety or security light into their yard at night, maybe when their daughter's trying to sleep. So this is really what it's all about. I think there's a lot of misconception about what dark sky means and what it is. And I think we have to work diligently to educate people what it means from a lighting perspective.
I just found that one interesting.
No, it made me laugh when I read it, Bill. When I pulled it up, I was laughing and like this. And this Palo Alto, this is actually one of the wealthiest, most affluent communities in the United States. But that was interesting. And I think some of it was that there was a reaction to turning off. I think part of it's a reaction to a curfew originally closed at 10 p.m., which is pretty early for an urban area. And in the end, they were proposing 12 p.m. Well, realistically, most people are in bed during the week, realistically. Many communities in France and a growing number of communities in the UK are turning their streetlights off after midnight to save money because energy is incredibly expensive in Europe at the moment because of the Ukraine war. To my knowledge, crime hasn't increased, traffic accidents. We'd have heard it if it had, right? But it hasn't. So these communities are coming to embrace it because they can realize, if we turn our streetlights off for 6 hours a night, then we actually save money. They don't even have to turn them off. They put them on a control system, they could dim them down to 10%. You probably won't even notice the difference, to be honest. So it's just about being smart. I like to say, Bill, no, most of us now when we're brushing our teeth, we don't turn the tap on and keep it there while we brush our teeth for 2 or 3 minutes. We tend to turn the tap off once we wet our toothbrush, right? So we need to start to think about light in the same way as a precious resource. It needs to be there when we need it and off when there's no one around.
Ruskin, it's really scary out there, buddy. It's a scary world. And I think that's really...
I understand. Yeah, you need to floss as well, right? I know my dentist tells me that every time. I know I need to floss.
Cut down on those M&Ms. Elsewhere in the policy space, I had an interesting piece come up from Ottawa that featured past guest Chetna Misra. As a suburban Ottawa expands into former farmland, there's a call for some type of light pollution mitigation action, be it from a new bylaw or an educational campaign. The request is being championed by Councillors David Hill and Teresa Cavanaugh, both representing suburban districts of Ottawa. The issue derives from the lack of any kind of lighting constraints beyond property standards bylaw that states light used to illuminate any area for vehicular and pedestrian traffic or parking shall be arranged to deflect away from neighboring residential properties unless the light is required for public health and safety. I'll also point out that Ottawa has a municipal engineering guideline for managing glare and utilizing shielding on its own streetlights. And it's not clear responsible lighting policies have much of an appetite beyond this in Ottawa. The motion put forth by Kavanaugh passed the committee, but won't be considered even if it's picked up until after the October elections. Councillor Riley Brockington put forth a more sobering political reality, stating that the contradiction in this one is that some of my residents want more lighting. They don't want less lighting. And I think for those of you who are with me today, this is nothing new. Often I get a sense that in populated areas, people think, this is a lost cause. But some 30 years ago, a team of volunteers in the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada created the Light Pollution Abatement Program. These folks are still around, or the program's still around, including folks like Chetna, working with municipalities to install best practice design standards, not necessarily legal remedies, I know I used to help out with a small group here in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Outdoor Lighting Council, that worked with local townships and helped them to adopt ordinances, best practices ordinances in their municipal code. It's very different from, say, Ruskin, Dark Sky, Pennsylvania here, which I am a part of. That's largely an educational endeavor. It's not really a policy advocacy or a working with, grassroots community groups that should build a more responsible approach to lighting. Is one better than the other? Is there a better approach? Should you be an educational group or should you be a policy group? Is there a better approach here?
Well, my belief, Bill, like every group is going to focus on the areas that they feel like can be most effective, right? So I would never suggest a group that feels comfortable doing education should focus on policy, or that a group that's focused on feels comfortable in policy should just focus on education. But I think each of those both those groups are stronger if they're working together. In the end of the day, education is essential, but we do need that to be. We need smart policy in place. We need smart regulations in place around this, simple no-regret regulations. But to have those regulations, we need people to understand what they mean and what they don't mean, right? So and I think the challenge for these groups is particularly with some of the dark sky groups, it feels comfortable to take people out under a starry sky and maybe show them the messier objects, right? I think we need to marry that up with helping train the trainer. We need to be able to have people go out and actually show them the difference between good and bad lighting. Like we're not talking about taking the lighting away. If you adopt this code, I mean, you'll get more lighting like this and less lighting like that. And, every time we've shown people the difference between bad and good and bad lighting, people always choose the good lighting. No one chooses the bad lighting. It's that simple. Like once you have, you call it the curse, right? Once someone has showed you, it takes you about 5 minutes to show you, then you have the curse. And every time you drive, you're anything like me, Bill, you drive across town and you're cursing all the time because there's so much bad lighting out there that could be fixed so simply.
Yeah, I just was going to say, Ruskin, I totally can relate to the train the trainer comment there. One of my favorite places to go with my telescope is Grasslands National Park, which is a dark sky preserve about 300 kilometers from where I live. And, all of the surrounding communities have, adjusted their lighting policies to support the park. The park itself has very responsible lighting. In fact, motion sensors and, dimmable lights, all of the right things. But the non-park employees, like the guests, like me, really need to be educated because most humans, our natural reaction is to turn on a light switch when it's dark or pull out a flashlight. I'm going there in 2 days, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to run into lighting that drives me crazy on the side of an RV, that has lights on all night. And I don't believe anybody does it out of base of maliciousness. They just don't know. And education is so important. And I think once people understand the impacts, they adhere pretty quickly. And it's even more pronounced in such a sensitive area. Like the darker it is, the smallest of light really has a huge impact. And, I think that as these parks come online to be dark sky preserves, I feel like one of their big contributions to protecting the night skies is that educational component. Every guest that comes through the gate should be made aware, right, of what good lighting is, what it isn't, and how to be a good ally.
I think like curious there as well, because like for every astronomer, there's probably 10 people who care about birds, right? Or just natural beauty, right? So bridging this into the people who care about just the state of our planet and open space and green spaces, right? That's the opportunity, connecting this issue, the sort of dark sky concept with other things that people care about beyond astronomy, right? But yeah, most people love astronomy, but that's maybe once in a lifetime or maybe once a month, or how do we connect it to people's daily lives, things that they really care about each and every day.
Shane, I'm curious, when you see that, do you go over and talk to the people and just ask them, hey, can you just turn off the light?
Yeah. I'll try to have a conversation with them. If it's 1 a.m, I may wait till the next day because they're probably in bed and I don't want to disturb them.
You don't want to bang on the door?
No, I'm not that aggressive. But, the other thing we did too, actually, this is many years ago in Grasslands National Park, they had a number of those like solar lights that you would put kind of along your driveway or wherever. And we I won't admit this in too many public places, but we threw a number of those in the garbage on one trip. They were so annoying. And then we thought maybe not the right response. So we brought some red tape to make those lights red rather than bright white. And that helped a bit too.
I remember talking at a member event, I think it was someone's father. He used to be a SWAT officer, right? On these teams that come in when there's a bad situation. Well, the first thing they can do for operational safety and security is shoot out all the lights so they eliminate that glare and they can see again, right? So it's interesting, right? It's kind of counterintuitive.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there you go, Shane. You're like a little SWAT officer over there in Grasslands.
I'll bring my slingshot on Monday.
No, to be clear, we do not advocate doing that. We do not advocate that. We advocate the going up and having conversation with people and demonstrating and showing.
I think what you both said is that the lack of knowledge, right? That does just, I guess it's really the lack of assessing how we impact others, right? I asked the question about, if you go over and ask if they can turn off the lights, because we go camping in a spot in central Pennsylvania on a lake. We're surrounded by RVs, and the RVs are always, in my mind, the worst offenders because they have, for whatever reason, RVs have obnoxious lighting in weird spots, and people just have them on. And I don't think they may not even know they're on because they never look in that weird spot that has this absurd lighting, or B, they just, for whatever reason, forget about it, or, it seems to be something where they don't recognize their effect on anyone else. What we'll do is we'll go over, because we tent camp, and we'll go over and just knock early in the night and be like, hey, if it's possible, would you guys be able to turn it down? We're tent camping, and it goes right into our tent, and when they see that, most of the time they're receptive to it. So, it's like the cause and effect, like people just don't recognize oh yeah, I guess I'm actually doing something. I didn't even think about that, right? They don't see that actual impact. Ruskin, this goes kind of over to my next thing, where before the LED switchover, in my estimation, for me, this is just my thought on this, is that we were on the right path to shielding, to lighting implementations. Lighting felt more controlled. And then with the LEDs, all bets were off. Communities kind of stopped caring about their lighting ordinances. Things changed kind of overnight. I don't know if that's true or not, but why has it been so hard to kind of turn the corner on LEDs?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of people like to refer to the LEDs as our frenemy, right? The LED as a lighting source is an incredible tool. Right? You take, I'll just take the example of a lit sports field. If you're playing on an old legacy sports field, the lights would have to come on, they'd have to warm up, and they'd be at a certain level all night. And heaven forbid anyone accidentally turn it off between innings, because the game would have to be abandoned, right? Now, contrast that to an LED system. You can turn the lights on immediately. You can dim them down when you want. The controllability of the LED system is phenomenal. Both the optical control, you can put it exactly where you want it, the light levels control, and increasingly the control of spectra is possible. So the LED as a tool has the potential to actually solve much of the light pollution problem. The problem is that the LED suddenly made light incredibly cheap. Right, light is incredibly cheap. It's essentially free these days. Once you bought the fixture, you can run it all light and you don't watch your meter going round. And there's been, I believe the term is a Jevons paradox. All of the energy savings we should have had by transitioning to the LED lighting systems have been eaten up by us putting more lights up. And that's been documented in papers that came out a number of years ago. And I think at the root of this is something we talked about earlier. We do not see darkness as something to be valued. Right? Darkness is not just the absence of light. So until we start as a society to see darkness as something to be valued, something precious to be protected, we will continue to obliterate it just because we can. And I think that is the fundamental challenge here. Is how do we reframe that relationship? And again, I'll be really clear, it's not about denying people access to light, but let's reduce the waste in the system. Let's eliminate most of the waste, the uplight, the excessive light, the glare. Right. And then, yes, we could very quickly restore the night. And this is not just theoretical. Like when cities have done it, they have shown progress. Like the city of Tucson, where I live, switched out its streetlights. As you might know, it's home to some major observatories around this. So when the people who designed that street lighting system went into it at the start saying, we have two goals for this. We want to save energy, which is fantastic. We also want to make sure that we, at minimum, maintain sky quality over the observatories around town. What was so exciting is when people like John Ballantyne and others went out and measured it afterwards. Yes, they saved money. They saved, I think, it's $3.6 million a year on running the streetlight system. But they also reduced sky glow by 7 or 8% as measured at a distance. And no one noticed. Right? Yes, the light levels reduced on the ground. Yes, they dim after midnight, things like that. But no one noticed. The crime hasn't gone through the roof. The traffic hasn't suddenly crashing with each other. It's just like they designed the waste out of the system by using LED streetlights. Simple.
Before I get to you guys to have you guys plug what you guys are up to, I'm curious about Ruskin. What's your outlook? Are you optimistic we'll have this? People will actually start respecting, as you said, respect concept of darkness?
I am optimistic, and part is that even in the 7 years that I've been at Dark Sky, I've seen an increase in awareness. I've seen an increase in coverage of these issues by the media. We've seen a rapid growth in the number of dark sky places around the world and growth in our advocacy community. So that gives me great optimism. We haven't touched on it in this call yet, Bill, but the thing that gives me pause for concern is we're now outsourcing some of our light pollution into low Earth orbit with constellations of satellite that are going to reflect sunlight down to Earth. So this is the conundrum we're facing. Yes, we know how to solve it on the ground. We're at the start of potentially either fundamentally changing the night sky with constellations of millions of satellites, or we're early enough in the phase we could actually do that responsibly from the start. But which path are we going to take? I'm maybe less optimistic on that one than I am on ground-based, to be honest, at this point. But the optimism is that there's a growing community of people around the world who care about it.
Let's get into where we can find out about what you guys are doing. So, Ruskin, since you're the last one to talk, I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that people know how to reach Dark Sky International. But in case they haven't, how can they reach Dark Sky International?
Pretty simple. darksky.org. It's been our URL for years. So go to darksky.org, sign up as an advocate, a volunteer, receive our updates, and we're on all the usual social platforms. So,
Kaori, how can people learn about some of the stuff you're doing, connect with you, see about some of the work you're doing on your end?
Probably the best place would be actually my LinkedIn profile, because that's where I tend to put, my latest, what I've been up to, where maybe I appeared on TV or, what kind of research I'm doing. So that will be where you probably find the most latest thing, or you can just search for my name and then you'll probably find my official profile as well, where that, a lot of things about what I'm up to is listed. So that's probably those two.
Shane, how can people learn more about what's going over on the Actual Astronomy Podcast? Anything you're into? How can people follow you guys?
Yeah, our podcast, I think, is on pretty much every podcast app out there. So you should be able to find us wherever you like to listen. And we have a website of actualastronomy.com where we'll post show notes occasionally because we get into long discussions around Messier objects and other things. And we recognize that people are driving or whatever, and it's hard to sometimes capture everything. So just for quick reference, we'll throw some information up there too on some episodes.
Excellent. Well, I have one last article here. I want to touch on this piece and talking about streetlights. Now, I've had the story come up in my news feed for the past few months. Supporters will know it. They receive the full news feed. But the short of it is this. The city of Los Angeles' streetlights are funded primarily via property assessments, of which the assessment values pertaining to streetlights had held stagnant since 1996. In March, LA put forth street lighting assessment ballot per the state proposition 218, asking voters if they'd accept an increase in the assessment rate. The goal was to raise around $125 million per year for streetlight installation and maintenance. While everyone and their brother, and even Los Angeles City engineers report tells us how good streetlights are at deterring crime, apparently those same streetlights weren't good enough to stop over 200,000 streetlights from being damaged by copper thieves. So the hope was to generate money to fix and install new lights in the city. Every property owner received one vote, although the votes were weighted based towards properties that would incur a greater assessment value. Well, you know what? When people realize they're forking a bill, streetlights suddenly don't become top priority. On June 26, just under 80% of voters rejected the proposal. We had a story from Fort Lauderdale, Florida earlier this year, whereby there was a contentious back and forth on streetlight implementation. That was until the town council said, hey, residents wouldn't be forking a bill. Okay, right. They still are. But, if you don't tell people they're forking a bill, I guess they believe it. That's a pretty interesting thing there. If you're asked to fork the bill, just under 80% rejected that proposal.
It just shows you that people don't realize the cost of things that, we have out there, and that, cost the maintenance and to actually install. I don't know, I feel like, that could be, that probably is argument against, putting in more streetlights. And I actually quite like that they actually put it to the resident. This is how much it's costing, and it's going to be on your bill. What do you want to do?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating when people ask, are they prepared to pay with their wallet? No, I haven't read what the campaign was to get them to pass it, but now what they're going to be, the city of LA is going to be facing with is a failing street lighting system. Is not actually meeting the illumination standards that are set. So they're going to have to watch out. So it's really, really interesting. I'd be interested to learn more about how they positioned and discussed and described this, because they certainly aren't raising money to take the street lights out. So the system's still there, but it's probably going to be patchy and sporadic and not ideal.
I think really what they needed to have was LED streetlights, because I hear that they just eviscerate criminals. So you wouldn't have all this copper theft from these streetlights themselves if only they were brighter, bigger, and better to eviscerate the criminals as they were ripping out the copper in broad nightlight or daylight, depending on wherever the light was under the street lamp. So that about does it for this episode of Light Pollution News. I want to thank you at home for staying with us today. I also want to thank my guests graciously for sharing their time with me today. Ruskin Hartley, Dr. Kaori Yokochi, and the Actual Astronomy Podcast, Shane Ludtke. You can find all of today's links over on the show page for lightpollutionnews.com. Light Pollution News is a listener-supported show. If you like what you're hearing, why not support the show? Our listeners literally keep us going. You can learn more by clicking the support the show link in today's show notes. This episode of Light Pollution News was recorded on July 18th, 2026. Emily Byers and Laura Taylor are social media volunteers. The show is edited and arranged by Kate Involvement, and I'm your host, Bill McGeeney, reminding you to only shine the light where it's needed. All right, let's roll into some of the pieces that I wasn't able to get to in today's show, which is all good because we had great conversations, fun time, always excellent. So let's jump into it. In some more optimistic news, this came out of the French world, where the French are renowned for their taste and baguettes, affinity of fine cheeses, great wines, and perhaps could it be now their love for the night sky. Officials expanded the Mercantour Dark Sky Reserve to entirely envelop the Mercantour National Park, increasing the square kilometers of the reserve by 1,400, and the total population increased by 15,000 residents. This is a world first. Continuing on to some of the other items that we didn't get to, had an interesting study out of the journal JMIR. It's really more notable for its methodology. It found that folks who took in sunlight increased minutes of total sleep the following night. Specifically, it said that for each additional hour of sunlight, there were around 11 more minutes of sleep that night. Conversely, when exposed to evening artificial light, there was no apparent association with sleep outcomes. Researchers noted that this goes against the majority of the data out there and posited that these sample individuals entered the study already with a baseline of good sleep hygiene and tended to use relatively low light before bed. This study only had 21 participants, an 1840 artificial light at night portion, and only looked at the participants over the course of 7 days. It also didn't identify the color of the nighttime lighting, though the intensity was measured. However, given the constraints of sample size, the results weren't really the interest here. Rather, get this, the participants wore a headband that measured brain waves called an electroencephalography, or EEG. This device accurately measures sleep stages, identifying for how long individuals incurred light, intermediate, deep, or REM sleep. The methodology is an improvement over prior studies to simply utilize wristband readings. The participants also wore a data logger that was clipped to their collar, identifying light intensities at all hours. For the purpose of the study, artificial light at night was defined as how long the participant was exposed to light above 30 lux for the 2-hour period before snoozing. Elsewhere in clocks and sleep, a team measured whether exposure to 5 lux dim light at night during two critical developmental windows causes lasting disruption to the internal body clock and immune system function of mice. I'll note that the 5 lux is about as bright as a night light. The team exposed male mice to dim nighttime light, either during gestation or postnatally after they've been born, then tracked rest activity rhythms, clock gene expressions from the spleen, and immune responses in their early adulthood. Both groups showed disrupted daily activity patterns and flattened the spleen's internal molecular clock oscillations and signifying elevated immune cell recruitment when induced with an allergic type challenge. Gestation group also showed increased antibody production during the allergic response. I will note that the study used a melatonin deficient mouse strain, meaning that the effects observed cannot be explained by melatonin suppression alone, pointing to the deeper clock gene mechanisms. Also, only male mice were used in the study. Takeaway that the researchers wish to leave you with is that dim light at night during pregnancy alone was enough to produce a measurable immune and circadian disruption in these adult offspring. And since we had a piece on streetlights, I had this one here too. This is a pretty interesting one. Talking about taxpayers and streetlights. What about gas streetlights? Yes, they look nice. They put out significantly less glare. 2 studies assessed gas lights. One in Cincinnati found that these cute little lights are hardly efficient, probably not any news to anyone listening, but that they also leak more than your average home appliance, allowing 4% of the natural gas piped in to simply escape into the air. Meanwhile, one assessing Boston gas streetlights largely confirmed the finding of excessive leakage, but also provided a monetary figure. In 2024, Boston spent $750,000 on 2,800 gas streetlights, coming in at an average cost of $261 to operate each light annually. Compared that to LEDs, the researchers estimate based on some back-of-the-envelope math. On my part, the cost of LEDs is $30 per year to run. That's a streetlight assessment if I've ever heard one. Thank you for staying with me today.